Rebecca wiped the counter of Maple Junction Café for the 5th time that morning, though it was already spotless. The train station across the street in upstate New York hummed with the usual mix of footsteps, luggage wheels, and announcements echoing off the old walls. But inside the café, it felt painfully quiet, almost too still for a place that once overflowed with laughter. Ever since her father's passing, silence followed her like a shadow she couldn't shake off. She ran the café alone now, trying to keep alive the dream he had built when she was a child. But customers had thinned, expenses were rising, and the weight of grief made everything feel twice as heavy. Sometimes she caught herself listening for his voice in the kitchen, expecting him to walk out with flour on his apron. But all she ever heard was her own heartbeat, steady but tired. It didn't help that she worked late nights at the diner down the street, trying to save whatever she could. People saw her smiling face and thought she was fine, but every smile felt like lifting a brick dot at the diner. She blended into the background, just another waitress with a tired ponytail and polite voice. No one knew she owned a cafe on the verge of closing, or that she cried herself to sleep most nights. At afternoon, a cold December wind pushed through the train station doors, scattering old leaves into the cafe. Rebecca moved to sweep them, shivering as she worked near the entrance. That's when she noticed a man step inside tall, sharply dressed, but with a heaviness in his eyes that didn't match his perfect suit. He looked around slowly, as if searching not for food, but for something he'd lost long before arriving here. "Welcome," she said softly, offering her usual smile, even though her heart wasn't in it. He nodded, barely responding, and chose a corner seat facing the snowy streets outside. Rebecca brought him a menu, but he didn't open it, staring at the table instead. Something about him felt familiar, not his face, but the grief in his posture. After a long moment, he whispered, "Can I get a coffee?" "Black," she nodded, poured it fresh, and set it in front of him with quiet care. But as she turned to walk away, she heard the soft tremble in his breath, like someone trying not to break. She paused, sensing the same pain that had been living inside her since the funeral. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, unsure if she was crossing a line. The man looked up, his eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. "Not really," he admitted, surprising them both. "My daughter used to love places like this. She passed away last spring." Rebecca froze, her heart dropping as the words wrapped painfully around her own loss. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, pulling out a chair before she could stop herself. He didn't seem bothered. In fact, he looked relieved to not sit alone with his sadness. "I lost my dad this year," she added, voice cracking slightly. For a while, they simply sat there, two strangers connected by wounds that hadn't healed. "I'm Michael," he finally said, extending a trembling hand. "Rebecca," she replied, shaking it softly, her eyes meeting his with quiet understanding. Neither mentioned money, status, work, or anything beyond that moment of shared pain. But something about him still felt unusual. His watch looked expensive, his shoes polished, and his coat tailored. He didn't act like a wealthy man, though. He acted like a man who had lost everything that mattered. Rebecca didn't judge, didn't pry, just offered him a warm refill and a warmer presence. And for the first time in months, she felt less alone. When he finally asked why the cafe was nearly empty, she hesitated. "It used to be full," she said quietly, resting her hands on the counter. "My dad made this place special. Without him, it just doesn't feel the same." Her voice grew soft, almost ashamed of its weakness. Michael studied the room, the worn wooden tables, the faded chalkboard menu, the framed photos of her father, smiling proudly. There was something charming, something deeply human about the space. It wasn't a business failing. It was a heart grieving, and something inside Michael stirred, something he hadn't felt since his daughter's passing. "Why keep it open if it hurts so much?" he asked carefully, not out of judgment but concern. Rebecca swallowed hard, running her thumb across a coffee mug. "Because it was his dream," she whispered. And letting it die feels like losing him all over again. Michael's breath caught, because he understood that kind of pain too well. He had spent months trying to save pieces of his daughter's life. Her room, her favorite books, her paintings. But nothing brought her back, and every day he woke up feeling the same emptiness he saw in Rebecca's eyes. They were two broken stories meeting in the quiet corner of a forgotten cafe acute dot, just as Michael stood to leave. His phone rang loudly, breaking the soft calm around them. He answered reluctantly, turning toward the window. "Yes, this is Michael Harrison," he said, and Rebecca's eyes widened at the name. The Michael Harrison, one of the most powerful CEOs in New York. Worth billions. She blinked, suddenly self-conscious, feeling small in her worn apron and fading name tag. But when he ended the call and turned back to her, his expression wasn't superior or distant. It was thoughtful, deep. "Rebecca," he said softly, stepping close enough that she could see the grief etched into every line on his face. "What if I told you I have an idea that could change everything for you?" She frowned, confused, unsure if he meant emotionally or financially. But something about his voice told her this wasn't offering pity. It was something else entirely. Michael took a slow breath, staring around the cafe again with new eyes. The eyes of a man seeing possibility through the fog of pain. "I know what it's like to lose someone," he said. "But I also know that sometimes the right partnership can turn loss into a new beginning." Rebecca's heart pounded, unsure where this was going, but unable to look away. Then he said the words that changed her breath, her heartbeat, her entire life. "What if I helped you rebuild this place? Not because you need saving, but because it deserves a second chance, just like us." Rebecca stared at him, stunned, certain she had misheard. She had no idea that this moment, this cold December day, would be the start of something that neither grief nor fate could have predicted. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter as her knees weakened, and Michael waited, his offer hanging in the air like a door cracked open to a new life. Rebecca didn't answer right away. Her heartbeat was too loud, her mind too full of disbelief and fear. People didn't just walk into tiny cafes and offer help, especially not billionaires, especially not ones grieving their own tragedies. Michael seemed to sense her hesitation and stepped back slightly, giving her space. "I don't want to pressure you," he said quietly. "I just see something here, something worth saving." His eyes drifted to the picture of her father, smiling proudly from the wall. Rebecca felt her throat tighten, her fingers covering her mouth for a moment. "Why would you help me?" she finally whispered. "You don't even know me." Michael nodded, understanding the weight behind her question. "I know what loss does," he said softly. "I know what it feels like to wake up and have no idea how to move forward." He glanced toward the snowy window, blinking hard. "And I know that sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason." Rebecca swallowed, unable to ignore the warmth building inside her chest. She didn't believe in fate. Not really not, since everything fell apart. But something about this moment felt strangely guided, like a quiet hand nudging her forward. Still, she couldn't accept something without knowing the truth. "What exactly are you offering?" she asked carefully, her voice steadier now. Michael turned back to her with a gentle seriousness. "A partnership," he said. "I fund the restoration. You run the cafe your way." Her eyes widened. That's too much." Michael shook his head slowly. "No, it's not enough. You're keeping your father's dream alive. I'm just helping it grow." Rebecca pressed her hand to her chest, trying to breathe. She had spent months drowning in grief and bills, convinced her future was already sealed. And now this man, this stranger, was offering her a lifeline she never dreamed she'd receive. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and suddenly finding a bridge beneath her feet. But doubt still whispered inside her. "What if I fail?" she murmured. Michael met her eyes with a steady, confident calm. "Then we try again. People who have lost everything deserve more than one chance." Rebecca's lips trembled. She thought of her father's laugh, his determination, his belief that kindness could grow roots in the toughest soil. He always said good people show up when you least expect them. Maybe this was one of those moments. "Okay," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of hope. Michael's shoulders loosened, relief softening his features for the first time. "Okay," he repeated gently, as if sealing a promise neither of them fully understood yet. The cafe suddenly felt warmer, like the air itself had shifted. Over the next few weeks, the quiet cafe transformed into a small whirlwind of activity. Contractors arrived, painters came, and designers called Rebecca for final touches. She was overwhelmed at first, signing papers, choosing materials, managing orders. But Michael encouraged her every step, never controlling, only guiding. They met almost daily, sharing coffee, plans, and slowly. Stories. Rebecca learned he used to bring his daughter to small cafes after school to talk about art and life. He learned how Rebecca grew up helping her father behind the counter, learning kindness before business. Their conversations felt effortless, deeply human, and strangely healing. Michael never treated her like an employee or a charity project. He treated her like an equal, like someone important. Rebecca hadn't felt important in a long, long time. Not since she held her father's hand in that hospital room for the last time. One evening, after the workers had left, Rebecca stood in the middle of the cafe, staring at the fresh paint and warm lighting. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't from sadness this time. Michael walked in quietly behind her, stopping when he saw her shoulders shaking. "Rebecca?" he said gently. She turned, wiping her tears, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I can't believe this is really happening." Michael stepped forward and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You deserve a new beginning," he said softly, "and this place deserves to shine again." She looked up at him, her breath catching at the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time since her father died, she felt truly safe. When opening day finally arrived, the cafe looked completely reborn. Warm lights glowed through the windows. Soft music played inside, and the smell of fresh pastries drifted into the winter air. People from the town poured in out of curiosity and nostalgia. The room buzzed with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of cups. Rebecca worked the counter with a smile she hadn't felt in months. Customers complimented everything, the decor, the food, the feeling. It was the first time she didn't feel alone in the cafe since her father's passing. His spirit felt alive in every corner of the room. Michael stood in the back, watching with quiet pride. He didn't want attention or recognition. He just wanted to see her happy. When Rebecca finally approached him, breathless and glowing, he smiled. "You did all this," he said. She shook her head quickly. "No, we did this." For a moment, neither spoke, sharing a silence filled with gratitude instead of grief. Their losses hadn't disappeared, but together they had grown something beautiful from the broken pieces. As the evening light dimmed and the last customers left, Rebecca locked the front door and sighed with relief. She turned to Michael, leaning against the counter. "You know, I never expected help from someone like you," she said softly. Michael chuckled lightly. "And I never expected to find hope in a small cafe across from a train station," he replied. They both smiled, realizing how strange and magical life could be. Then Michael stepped closer, just enough to speak gently without the world hearing. "Rebecca, this partnership, it saved me too." Her breath caught at the honesty in his voice. He wasn't just rebuilding her cafe, he was rebuilding himself. Their grief had collided, not to break them, but to rebuild what life had stolen. And from that collision, a new purpose bloomed. Rebecca reached for his hand slowly, almost unsure. He didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined softly, naturally, like two stories finally ready to move forward. Not as Billionaire and Waitress, but as two people learning how to live again. Outside, snow fell quietly over the streets of New York. People rushed through the station, unaware that inside the glowing cafe, two hearts had just found a second chance. Loss had brought them together, but possibility would carry them forward. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca felt hopeful about tomorrow. That night, as Michael walked her to the door, he paused. "Rebecca, I'm glad I came in that day," he said. She smiled, warmth filling her chest. "I'm glad you did too." The cafe lights glowed behind them like a newly lit future dot, and neither of them knew exactly where this story would go next. But for the first time since their losses, they weren't afraid of what came after. They were ready to turn the page together.